She always put it off until tomorrow, until one day, tomorrow came to collect. The first offer arrived at 9:14 on a Thursday night. Laura Hayes stared at the message on her phone, then at the designer chair beside her. She had paid $1,400 for it 11 months earlier, after a difficult week at work. The stranger offering to buy it wanted to pay $180. Around Laura, the living room looked less like a home than the remains of an estate sale nobody had attended. A polished espresso machine sat beside two unopened boxes of glassware. A leather tote rested beneath a floor lamp she had once called an investment piece. Each object carried a memory of the sentence she had used to excuse it. "I work hard. I deserve something beautiful. I'll get serious about saving next month." On the coffee table, her laptop displayed 3 numbers she could no longer avoid. Her checking balance was $1,086. Her rent was due in 6 days. The minimum payments on her credit cards were due before the end of the week. Then her phone lit again. It was a message from her older sister, Rebecca. "Mum's appointment was moved up. The treatment needs to begin as soon as possible. Can you call me tonight? We need to decide what we can cover." Laura closed her eyes. For 17 years, she had gone to the same office, parked in the same section of the same lot, and received a paycheck every other Friday. She had believed that routine was security. Now the company was gone, the paycheck was gone, and Laura did not have enough money to finance 30 ordinary days of her own life. Before this story ends, Laura will make one decision that hurts more than losing her job, selling her possessions, or admitting how much she owes. It will also become the first honest decision of her financial life. But to understand why it took a crisis to make her choose it, we have to return to the months when tomorrow still felt unlimited. At 47, Laura was a senior purchasing specialist for Bellwether Home Supply, a regional furnishings distributor in Pittsburgh. She was good at her job. She remembered vendors' terms without looking them up, noticed shipping discrepancies before invoices were approved, and could calm an irritated warehouse manager with one measured phone call. Her salary was not extravagant, but it was dependable. Dependability had become the foundation of every financial assumption she made. On payday mornings, Laura paid what demanded immediate attention. Then she let the remaining money create a feeling of abundance it did not deserve. A dinner reservation appeared. A sale notification promised 40% off. A weekend in Washington sounded too brief to count as a real vacation. When her mother admired a scarf, Laura bought the more expensive one and refused repayment. She was not careless in every part of life. Her calendar was precise, her work files were orderly, her refrigerator was clean. The disorder existed behind passwords, 3 credit card balances, subscriptions she barely noticed, and a savings account containing less than the cost of 1 month's rent. Whenever Laura felt the first sting of concern, she made the same promise. Next month she would organize everything. Next month she would build a reserve. Next month she would finally think about retirement. Then next month arrived carrying a birthday, a trip, an inconvenient repair, or a reason she had worked too hard to deny herself something. If you believe women deserve stories that face money, dignity, and the future with honesty, subscribe to this channel and stay with Laura until the end. This is a new channel, and your subscription helps us keep telling stories that may reach a woman at exactly the moment she needs one. Laura's sister, Rebecca, was 51 and worked as a radiologic technologist. Rebecca did not have Laura's taste for beautiful rooms, but she had something Laura quietly envied: margin. She knew what her essential expenses were. She kept money aside for emergencies. When an appliance failed, it annoyed her, but it did not reorganize her entire month. One Saturday, the sisters met their 72-year-old mother, Diane, for lunch. Diane was retired, independent, and determined not to become a project for either of her adult daughters, 51-year-old Rebecca and 47-year-old Laura. When the check arrived, Laura reached for it automatically. "Let me get my part," Diane said. "Absolutely not." Laura placed her card on the tray. "It's lunch, Mom. I'm not buying you a house." Rebecca watched her. "You always do that." "Do what?" "Spend before anyone can ask whether you should." Laura laughed, but the observation landed harder than she showed. "It's $35, Rebecca." "It's never one $35 thing." Diane gave Rebecca a warning look. Laura signed the receipt with a smile that had gone stiff. In the parking lot, Rebecca tried again. She asked whether Laura had ever calculated how long she could manage without her paycheck. "Why would I be without it?" Laura replied. "Because companies close, people get sick, cars stop running. Life doesn't ask whether the timing is convenient." Laura unlocked her car. "Bellwether has been around for 38 years. That is history, not a guarantee. I'll look at everything next weekend." Rebecca leaned against the next car. "You said that in January. Then I mean it this time." Laura did mean it, at least while she was speaking, but the following weekend, a colleague invited her to an outlet event. Laura bought the chair. The purchase was too large for checking, so she put it on a card and told herself she would pay it off with her annual bonus. The bonus was smaller than expected. She used part of it for a short trip, part for a past-due balance, and the rest disappeared into ordinary spending. The chair remained, and so did the debt. At work, warning signs had begun to accumulate. One vendor moved Bellwether to stricter payment terms. A warehouse aisle stayed emptier than usual. Two executives held closed-door meetings that ended when other employees approached. Laura noticed all of it and interpreted none of it. When a co-worker asked whether she was worried, Laura pointed to a stack of open purchase orders. "We have too much work to disappear." The sentence comforted her because it sounded logical. It was not. On a Tuesday morning in early spring, every Bellwether employee received an invitation to an all-staff meeting at 10. At 10:07, the company's president stood in front of 62 adults and announced that a failed acquisition had left the business unable to continue operations. There would be no long transition. Employees would receive information about final pay, benefits, and unemployment claims. Their managers would answer what they could. The office would close. For several seconds, Laura heard only the ventilation system. Then people began asking questions at once. Her first thought was strangely practical. She had yogurt in the break room refrigerator. Her second thought was that her next paycheck had already been assigned to rent, cards, utilities, insurance, and a weekend she had not yet cancelled. Her third thought was the most dangerous. "This will be temporary. I don't need to panic." She packed a framed print, 2 notebooks, a mug, and the small plant that had survived 9 years beside her monitor. As she carried the box to her car, she passed the loading dock where trucks had once arrived every morning. The silence there made the closure real in a way the meeting had not. At home, Laura placed the box in the hall and opened her banking applications. She had $2,143 across checking and savings. Her essential monthly expenses, even before credit card payments, were higher than that. She checked again, as though one of the numbers might apologize and change. Then she opened the cards. The combined balances were $18,640. Laura had never added them together before. She walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and left it untouched. Rebecca's old question returned with humiliating clarity. How long could she manage without a paycheck? The answer was not 1 month. Laura cut the easiest expenses, the uncancelled weekend, a meal service, 2 streaming subscriptions. The relief was almost theatrical. She had found several $100s and felt rescued, but several $100s could not repair a monthly structure that required thousands. The next morning, Laura created a spreadsheet. She colored the cancelled expenses green and left everything else untouched. For 20 minutes, the green cells made her feel efficient. Then she added rent, utilities, car insurance, groceries, fuel, minimum card payments, health coverage, and the recurring charges she had forgotten. The total rose past the amount she had available. She told herself the spreadsheet was too pessimistic. Surely groceries could be lower. Surely she would not spend anything unexpected. Surely an interview would arrive before the rent after this one. She reduced several estimates until the total looked survivable, but the numbers had not become more accurate. They had only become more comforting. At noon, a package arrived. Laura had ordered a pair of shoes before the closure and forgotten about them. For a few seconds, opening the box produced the old spark. Clean tissue paper, untouched leather, the private pleasure of possessing something new. Then she saw the receipt. She carried the unopened package to her car and returned it that afternoon. Standing in line, she watched the refund move back to her card rather than into her checking account. The money did not feel recovered. It felt like a small hole being closed in a wall already covered with cracks. That evening, she opened a drawer filled with receipts and warranty cards. She found restaurant bills she could not remember, clothing she had stopped wearing, and a hotel deposit from a trip that had seemed essential when she booked it. None of the purchases had looked ruinous by itself. Together, they revealed her method. Hundreds of permission slips issued to the present and charged to the future. She filed the employment paperwork she had been given and began an unemployment claim, understanding that eligibility, timing, and the amount were not hers to dictate. She updated her resume and applied to 6 positions during the first 3 days. When Rebecca called, Laura said the company was restructuring. "What does that mean?" Rebecca asked. "It means I'm considering my options." It was not exactly a lie, Laura told herself. She was considering every option except telling the truth. 1 week later, Diane received the medical recommendation that changed the scale of the crisis. Her physician wanted treatment to begin promptly. Diane had health coverage, but transportation, appointments, uncovered expenses, and time away from Rebecca's work would still create pressure. Rebecca called Laura from her parked car. "We need to make a plan," she said. "Mom keeps saying she can handle everything, which means she's frightened." Laura gripped the phone. "What do you need from me?" "I can take her to most appointments, but I'll lose hours. I thought maybe you could cover some of the other costs. You always have more flexibility than I do." The assumption was reasonable. Laura had spent years creating it. "Let me move a few things around," she said. "How much time do you need?" "A day or 2. That evening, Laura began photographing her possessions. She listed the chair, handbags, kitchen equipment, decorative pieces, and clothing that still carried tags. In her mind, their original prices formed a hidden emergency fund. The market disagreed. People offered a fraction of what she had paid. Some did not appear after arranging to meet. One buyer examined a nearly new handbag and pointed to a tiny mark Laura had never noticed. Every negotiation felt personal because Laura had used the objects to prove something about herself. Within 10 days, she sold 19 items. After fees and discounts, the money did not equal the balance on the card she had used to buy the chair and several of the other pieces. That was when the first offer arrived, $180. Laura rejected it. 5 minutes later, she sent the buyer another message and accepted. The empty space left by the chair looked larger than the chair ever had. She transferred the sale money into checking, paid 2 minimums, and told Rebecca she could contribute a small amount the following week. She did not say the money had come from dismantling her living room. Job applications produced automatic confirmations, then silence. Laura had assumed that 17 years of loyalty would translate into immediate demand. Instead, interviewers asked about software Bellwether had never adopted, purchasing systems Laura had not used, and experience across multiple industries. Her first real interview took place by video. Laura positioned the camera so the missing furniture would not show, and wore the navy jacket she had used for vendor meetings. The hiring manager, a 44-year-old woman named Elena Price, asked Laura to describe a time she had used current analytics tools to forecast a supply disruption. Laura answered with a bellwether story about phone calls, handwritten comparisons, and instinct developed over years. The outcome had been good, but her explanation sounded as old as the process behind it. Elena thanked her and moved on. Laura knew before the call ended. The rejection arrived the following afternoon. It was polite and brief. Laura read it 6 times, searching for a sentence that might make the decision feel temporary. Then she opened a shopping site without thinking. Her hand stopped over the trackpad. The impulse was so familiar that she had mistaken it for preference. Bad news created discomfort. Browsing created possibility. Buying something gave the day a new event, one Laura could control. For years, a difficult meeting had become dinner out. A lonely Sunday had become a delivery. An anxiety had become a package traveling toward her door. Laura closed the page. The anxiety remained. That was the part no one advertised. When she stopped spending to change her feelings, she still had to feel them. She sat in the quiet apartment and allowed the rejection to be disappointing without making it expensive. Marcus Reed, a 49-year-old purchasing manager she knew from a vendor conference, agreed to review her resume. They met at a coffee shop. Marcus read the first page twice. "You did important work," he said, "but you describe it as if Bellwether is the only company that needs to understand it." Laura frowned. "I was there 17 years. That tells me you can commit. It doesn't automatically tell another employer how quickly you can adapt." He pointed to several lines filled with internal names and outdated processes. "Translate this into outcomes, and you need current systems training." "How long will that take?" "Longer than you want, less time than pretending you don't need it." Laura almost resented him. Then she recognized the pattern. Once again, she had treated tomorrow as if it would provide a solution she refused to begin today. She enrolled in an affordable online course and rewrote her resume. But learning took time, and bills did not pause to admire effort. Her checking balance dropped. A card issuer added interest. Her next rent approached. She began moving expenses between cards, telling herself it was a bridge to her next job. One afternoon, Diane called and thanked her for helping. "You shouldn't have to do this," Diane said. Laura looked at the nearly empty wall where her art had been. "It's fine. You always say that before anyone gets the chance to worry about you." Laura changed the subject. The lie finally collapsed on a Monday morning. Rebecca stopped by unexpectedly after Laura failed to answer 2 calls. She walked into the apartment and froze. Half the furniture was gone. Shipping boxes had been turned inside out to reuse for sales. On the table lay a yellow legal pad covered in amounts, due dates, and desperate arrows. Rebecca looked at Laura. "How long has it been like this?" Laura tried to produce one more reassuring sentence, but her body refused. She sat down. "The company closed 3 weeks ago." Rebecca did not speak. "I have debt," Laura continued, "more than I told you. More than I admitted to myself. I don't have enough for next month. The money I gave Mom came from selling things." Rebecca's face changed from confusion to anger, then fear. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you warned me." "That is not an answer." "Because if I told you, then every stupid thing I bought became evidence. Every time I said I was fine became a lie. And because Mom needs us, and I couldn't stand being the one who needed help instead." Rebecca walked to the window. When she turned back, her voice was quieter. "I'm angry that you hid it. I'm not angry that you lost your job. You were right. I don't need to be right. I need you to stop disappearing behind that word tomorrow." They spent the next 2 hours at the table. Rebecca did not offer to erase Laura's debt, and Laura did not ask. They began with what was real: cash available, essential expenses, minimum obligations, applications in progress, and possessions already sold. They separated housing, food, utilities, transportation, health coverage, and required payments from everything Laura had been maintaining out of habit or pride. Then they listed the companies Laura needed to contact. She would ask what options existed, rather than assume silence was safer. She would document every conversation and understand the terms before agreeing to anything. The exercise did not create money. It created visibility. Visibility was painful, but it also made action possible. Laura called the first card issuer, while Rebecca sat across from her. She explained the loss of employment and asked what hardship options might be available, what each option would cost, how long it would last, and how it could affect the account. The representative described possibilities specific to the account and made no promise that one call would solve the balance. Laura wrote down every term, asked for written confirmation, and refused to agree to anything she did not understand. The second call produced different information. The third required a transfer and a long wait. There was no cinematic moment in which the companies erased what she owed. Some pressure could be adjusted. Much of the debt remained hers. Yet calling replaced imagined catastrophe with actual choices. Next, Laura reviewed the information connected to her job loss and health coverage. She treated every deadline and eligibility question as something to verify, not something to assume. Rebecca helped her make a folder for notices, applications, confirmation numbers, and questions. The folder was plain and inexpensive. It became more valuable than half the decorative storage Laura had sold. They also discussed Diane's needs honestly. Rebecca listed transportation, time away from work, meals on appointment days, and the expenses Diane expected. Laura had been treating the situation as one enormous bill she was morally required to absorb. Once the needs were separated, the family could divide them without pretending any one person had unlimited capacity. "I can handle scheduling and calls," Laura said. "And I can drive her on the days that don't conflict with interviews." Rebecca nodded. "That matters. It doesn't feel like enough." Enough is not the same thing as doing everything. Laura wrote a smaller, sustainable contribution beside her name. It was less impressive than the amount she had first promised and far more honest. For the first time, Laura understood what an emergency fund was supposed to provide. It was not proof that someone had mastered life. It was a cash reserve for the expenses and interruptions nobody could schedule. A repair, a medical bill, a loss of income. Even a small reserve could reduce the need to turn one emergency into more expensive debt. The right target depended on a person's own obligations and risks, but the purpose was simple. Money set aside bought time to make decisions before fear made them instead. Laura had spent years buying objects that made her feel secure for an evening. She had never bought herself time. Rebecca drew a line beneath the numbers. There's something else, Laura already knew. The apartment consumed too much of her reduced resources. Even if she found another job soon, keeping it would force her back onto cards before she could recover. "I love this place," Laura said. "I know. It's the first home that ever felt like mine." "Then deciding what it costs you has to be part of loving it." Laura cried then. Not because Rebecca was cruel, but because she was not. Anger would have allowed Laura to defend herself. Compassion left her alone with the truth. That night, Laura walked through every room. She remembered choosing the windows, arranging the shelves, hosting Diane and Rebecca for dinner. Leaving felt like turning a financial failure into an address everyone could see. It was the decision she resisted more than any other. 2 days later, she spoke with her property manager about the lease terms and available options. She ran the numbers repeatedly. Then she agreed to move, on the earliest workable date, into a smaller apartment farther from the center of the city. The savings would not solve everything. They would stop the largest monthly leak. Laura called Rebecca after signing the paperwork. "I did it," she said. There was a pause. "How do you feel?" "Like I failed publicly." "You made a private problem visible so you could fix it. That isn't the same thing." The move stripped away more than square footage. Laura sold what would not fit and donated what had little resale value. She kept the plant from her office, Diane's scarf, one good pan, and the table where she and Rebecca had faced the numbers. She also accepted a 12-week inventory control contract at a medical supply warehouse. The title sounded like a step backward. The hourly rate was lower than her previous salary, and the schedule began before sunrise. On her first morning, Laura sat in her car watching employees enter through a side door. Pride offered her one final escape: drive home, wait for the suitable position, preserve the story of who she had been. She turned off the engine and went inside. The work was physical, detailed, and unfamiliar. Laura made mistakes. She asked adults younger than she was to show her procedures they understood better. Each question bruised her ego and strengthened her future. At night, she continued her systems course. Marcus helped her translate the contract work into current experience. Rebecca handled most of Diane's transportation, while Laura contributed smaller, agreed amounts and took over scheduling calls and paperwork when she could. The family stopped treating help as a contest measured only in dollars. Diane's treatment continued. Some weeks were tiring, but the story did not make her condition a spectacle. What mattered to Laura was the new honesty between them. One evening, Diane sat at Laura's smaller kitchen table and looked around the apartment. "You gave up a lot," she said. Laura considered the bare wall, the ordinary lamp, and the mismatched chairs. "I gave up things I was paying to pretend I was safe." "And are you safe now?" "Not yet, but now I know what safe would require." Laura's first goal was deliberately modest. She would place a small amount in a separate savings account each payday, while continuing essential payments and following the arrangements she had made. The transfer happened automatically after her contract deposit arrived. She chose an amount she could sustain instead of an impressive amount she would cancel. The first transfer looked almost embarrassing beside her debt. Laura nearly redirected it to a card. Then she remembered the purpose: not to ignore debt and not to chase a perfect balance, but to create a thin layer between the next surprise and another borrowed dollar. Weeks became months. Laura did not transform into a person who never wanted anything. She still stopped at shop windows. She still imagined the version of herself who owned a perfect room. But she learned to wait without calling waiting deprivation. She created 3 simple categories for discretionary decisions. Some purchases were useful and planned. Some were pleasures she could afford within the amount she had chosen. Others were attempts to silence an emotion with a transaction. Rebecca noticed the change when they met for coffee. Laura ordered what she wanted, paid without ceremony, and did not insist on covering Rebecca's drink. "No dramatic gesture?" Rebecca teased. "I budgeted for 1 coffee, not a public demonstration of success." Rebecca laughed. "That may be the healthiest sentence you've ever said." Laura smiled, then grew serious. "I used to think you judged me because money was easier for you." "It wasn't always easier. I was just more frightened of running out. And I was frightened that planning would make my life feel small." The sisters looked at the 2 ordinary cups between them. "Does it?" Rebecca asked. Laura shook her head. "The fear made it small. The plan gives it edges." When the warehouse contract ended, her supervisor recommended her for a permanent procurement analyst opening with another division. Laura interviewed with examples from Bellwether, the warehouse, and her new training. She spoke honestly about adapting after a long tenure. She received the job. Laura read the offer twice before calling anyone. The old instinct told her to celebrate with a purchase large enough to symbolize the comeback. She even pictured a new chair, Simpler than the old one, she told herself, and therefore responsible. Instead, she called Diane and Rebecca. They met for dinner at Laura's apartment, where she cooked with the one good pan she had kept. Diane brought flowers, Rebecca brought dessert. Laura paid for none of it with a card balance she would avoid later. They celebrated the job without pretending it erased the months behind it. Laura thanked Marcus the next day and offered to help another displaced bellwether colleague, an adult former co-worker, translate her own experience into a clearer resume. She did not call herself an expert. She simply passed along what someone had taken the time to show her. On her first payday, Laura divided the money before emotion could volunteer it elsewhere. Essential bills came first. Agreed debt payments followed. A sustainable transfer moved into her reserve. A modest amount remained for ordinary enjoyment. The system was not dramatic enough for the woman Laura had once tried to appear to be. It was strong enough for the woman she had become. The salary was slightly lower than her old one, but the benefits were stable and the work gave her room to grow. More important, Laura did not use the offer as permission to restore every expense she had removed. She built a spending plan around her actual take-home pay. She chose a defined amount for enjoyment because a plan that treated every pleasure as guilt would not survive. She continued paying down her cards. She reviewed her statements every week, not to punish herself, but to prevent distance from becoming denial. Then, 4 months into the new job, her car needed a repair. The estimate was large enough to make her stomach tighten. The old Laura would have reached for a card, promised to solve it next month, and refused to look at the balance again. The new Laura opened her emergency account. Using the money hurt. For an hour, she believed the shrinking balance proved that all her discipline had been erased. Then Rebecca reminded her of what Laura herself had learned at the kitchen table. The money wasn't there to be admired, Rebecca said. It was there for this. Laura paid part of the repair from the reserve and covered the rest from that month's planned margin. She did not add new revolving debt. On the next payday, her automatic transfer began rebuilding the account. That was the moment the lesson became permanent. Financial preparation did not mean preventing every bad event. It meant allowing a bad event to remain one problem instead of multiplying into 5. A year after Bellwether closed, Laura opened the box she had carried from the office. The notebooks were outdated. The mug was chipped. The framed print no longer matched anything she owned. The plant, however, had produced 2 new leaves. Laura placed it near the window and reviewed her accounts. Her credit card debt was not gone, but it was moving in one direction. Her reserve was not enormous, but it existed, had served its purpose once and was growing again. Diane's condition was being managed. Rebecca no longer had to guess whether Laura was telling the truth. Laura scheduled her weekly financial review. The old voice appeared one last time. "You're tired, do it tomorrow." She looked at the plant, opened the statement and began. Tomorrow had once sounded like mercy. It had allowed her to enjoy the present without confronting its cost. Then tomorrow came to collect, not as punishment, but as the accumulated result of every choice she had asked her future self to carry. Laura could not return the years she had postponed. She could not recover the full price of what she had bought, erase the fear her secrecy had caused, or guarantee that another crisis would never come. What she could do was stop sending every difficult decision forward. Preparing for the future did not require her to live in fear. It allowed her to live with less of it. Saving was not a refusal to enjoy today. It was a promise that the woman she would be tomorrow deserved protection too. And caring for the people she loved did not mean appearing endlessly capable. Sometimes it meant building enough honesty and stability to remain beside them when life became expensive, uncertain, and real. If Laura's journey reminded you of one tomorrow you no longer want to postpone, subscribe to the channel. We are just beginning, And every new subscriber helps these stories reach more women who may need them. Thank you for staying with Laura to the end. Now choose the story appearing on your screen and keep moving toward the future you want to protect. One honest decision